Okay, guys, so what I want to talk about today is everything about kind of DDS files and what those things are, how we can convert them between games, etc. Now, first off, a DDS file is what makes up the skin on a 3D model in Warhammer 3, or really many of the Warhammer 1, 2, Troy, Attila, basically all of our games that we're talking about here for modding. And in fact, depending on what a game uses, it generally uses texture files as well that might be slightly different, but also might be the same, depending on the system that they're using. And even in Blender, it's the same concept. All right, so first off, we have this 3D model. And if we take a look at it, it's made up in Warhammer 3 of normal, mask, base color, material map. Now, this is a simplified form of things like from Warhammer 2, which used diffuse, normal, mask, gloss, specular. So we don't use the same things as we used to use, just as a point of reference. And all of these are just different texture files that were used in different Total War games. So things like Decal Dirt Map and Skin Mask, those things were used in Attila. So it just kind of depends on what you're using. All right. Anyway, so we're here. Now, if we take a look at this thing, we're going to go through what each of these parts do. I'm going to leave mask for the end. Let's start with normal. The normal defines the three-dimensional aspect of it. So if you notice, like the rivets here, the lamellar armor, the curvature of the belt buckle, the depth of these scratches, that's defined under the normal map, and it's basically an orange normal map, which not all games use an orange normal map. I think they switched over to it around Attila or Rome 2 or Rome 3, excuse me, something like that. Anyway, but if you notice, it's kind of got this depth. Now, the texture preview window is pretty good for previewing things, but it's not exactly what it looks like um, in your like in GIMP or Photoshop or what have you. Now, you should note that I have Photoshop, GIMP, and Paint.net all installed and all opened, and I'll go over how I use those, but I'll focus on GIMP and Paint.net since most of you guys have that. I mostly just do all of my photo editing in Photoshop, but anyway. So when we look at our base color now, base color is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to be the color of things. So if we turn it off, first of all, you'll notice that these parts become white. And the only reason this isn't white here is because the material map is telling it it's shiny metal. So if we get rid of that as well, we have the base color and it's white because it defines all the color of our model, right? So if you take a look at what this looks like, you'll see that the skin and the metals and the cloth of his pants and the fur, this is all defined in the base color, their coloring. Now, in the olden days, so in Warhammer 2 and such, they used two files to define this one base color. It was diffuse, which did the non-metallics, so cloth, skin, leather, fur, etc. That was all defined on diffuse. And then you had the specular, which defined the metallic. Now, for me, I found that it was much easier to match metals in Warhammer 2 due to the way that they did it between a specular and a gloss map, because the gloss would also give it sheen. But skin was much harder to match between models in Warhammer 2. So in Warhammer 3, it's much easier to match skin and stuff, but I find it harder to match. It's much easier to match the skin and non-metallics, but it's harder for me using base color to match metallics. So it's just one of those things. But if you were trying to update a mod from Warhammer 2 into Warhammer 3, you would take the diffuse portions and the specular and just overlay each other and combine the two parts together, so two layers into one layer. That's really all it would take. It's not too hard. Anyway, so we also have material map. Now the material map is what defines metallics and non-metallics. So as mentioned, I find it harder to match metals in this game, but it's doable. I just have to use Photoshop. I have to do image adjustments, and I have to like match colors between both the base color and the material map to get close, and then I have to do further adjustments. It was much easier to match up armor parts in Warhammer 2. Anyway, so here, the material map is, we can still see the same basic shapes. It's just that now we have orange or green. Green defines non-metallic, orange is metallic. And different layers of like amounts of green in these colors will affect how shiny or not shiny it is. And like I said, it is actually kind of challenging to get metals to match between different characters. So that's kind of the limitation of this method anyway, and that's what I've heard from other stuff anyway, is that you have the metals and the kind of non-metals. But notice if we label it through the reds and the greens, um, there's still some green in those parts that are giving it some slightly not exactly pure shine, if that makes sense. So anyway. So essentially, we just have to match. We can just go over all the metals in orange and all the non-metals in green. That's basically what they did. There's a little bit of variance between those things and other metals between characters, but that's the basic gist of it. Okay, now let's talk about mask. Now the mask doesn't necessarily look like this all the time or anything, but we have the red and we have it's labeled as the blue channel, but if I remember right, I mean, it looks green, so that seems weird. Why is it in the blue channel? But whatever. Granted, the previous one wasn't as well. So anyway, red is primary, green is tertiary or is secondary color, and blue is tertiary, if I remember right. I could be a little wrong, but whatever. Essentially, every unit has primary, secondary, and tertiary based on their the faction. So if we take a look here, so essentially it has either red over it has blue or green over parts of the skin. So in this case, like the shirt here on the base color, and the pants. So if we take a look at here, the pants stripes, we can see it here, the pant stripes here, right? And some of the cloth and stuff like that. Those things, by having a red mask layer over those parts, it tells the game that that will be the primary color of either the faction or the unit variant color. So essentially, your faction colors define what color these parts are based on the mask. So the primary faction color or the secondary. Tertiary is not used in factions as far as I'm aware. Also, not very many units use a tertiary, if any. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but you can define it by primary, secondary, and tertiary colors. And those are defined, like I said, in your faction colors or your unit variant colors, or whatever it's called, the variant colors. And the variant colors tables are often used for things like your Regiment of Renowns. And so that's how they basically have the same models of other game colors or other characters in the game, but then they're not sharing the same faction colors. They have their own colors. That is still set by the primary, secondary, and tertiary mask, but they just have different colors assigned to primary, secondary, and tertiary. Anyway, now what else mask does is what's called emissives. So if we're talking about like ghostly characters, so the Green Knight, for example, let's pull that up since I have that here. If we take a look at the Green Knight model, you'll notice that he actually doesn't look anything like he is in game, and that's because the rigid model doesn't define the emissive. The rigid model, though, if we take a look at like the mask here, notice there's a bit of like um, coloring here, just like this black. This black here defines an emissive. So the emissive is the glow of them. So this was his legs. Let's see his torso. Let's take a look at his mask here. Okay. Now, in reality, essentially it's black is what the mask looks like. It's just black, and that defines emissive. Anywhere where there's black or some layer of black, so you could have like a less dark black will be a less shiny emissive. But if you just have a black mask, that's how you get the emissive. And that emissive is like it does the ghostly glow effect over him, but it would also be like if you wanted to do like glowing tattoos on a character, you would define it in the mask with like a black design in it, and that would then glow. But the glow is actually set by the WS model. So you need the WS model, which creates these XMLs, material files. And so if we look in the material, I'm not going to go too much into it, but you can see in here emissive texture. You have like let's see, like the tint colors. So this kind of defines some tints, emissive distort strength, so how strong the emissive is. The gradient color, so it's like red, green, blue, if I remember right, as their the order of their colors. Anyway, so it's just one of those things. This is defining the emissive, and if you want more information about that, I'll link this guide. This, I mean, you can see an emissive in action here, and it kind of goes into it and talks about where to set the emissive in the materials and stuff like that. So I kind of utilize that when I'm dealing with it. I don't really deal with emissives much, to be honest, but I have kind of messed around a little bit with them. Anyway, so the mask does that, and again, it's black. So if you notice here, this black T here over that would give him like a black T on the cloak. Anyway, so you can set the emissive color to be anything you want. And in the olden days, before asset editor and stuff, in order to access the Green Knight model, I had to go through and like remove emissive. It was a pain. Anyway, so that's that. Now let's talk about where we can find these things, and let's talk about like what happens if I want to convert over like one model to another. So first of all, where these DDS files are found is if we go to right click, add from pack file in Rusted Pack File Manager, and we go to data, we're going to look at the variance DDS. So variance DDS2 is where most of them are for whatever reason, but they're all going to be found in one of these DDS things. So if we open this, we can see the different textures. So let's pull up the Green Knight. So Green Knight texture. So we have base color, mask, material map, normal. Now, one thing I should note is that while all of them actually have a mask, not all of them need a mask. So if you're working on a model that you don't need any emissives and you don't need any like faction color changing, so you don't want these colors to switch between factions. So let's say you're having like a legendary lord who doesn't change colors ever, then you don't need a mask. You could actually straight up just delete the mask from your portion. You wouldn't even need it. You just click on this and it would delete it. Don't even need it. But the game usually has it, even if it's an empty thing. Okay, so anyway, we have these parts. Here you can see the base color. Notice the skin is gray and his teeth are kind of gray, and that's because his skin isn't meant to be seen through, so it's not the normal peachy color, it's just a gray as like a ghostly shade, whatever, underneath the emissive. You have the mask. If you notice these, well, okay, this is his eyeballs, I believe, here is like glowing eyes. Notice it's very dark, so it makes the glowing effect more. And then you have like glowing for your whatever decorative style thing on his cloth here. Material map. Notice he has a bit of gloss in his on his skin, which is abnormal, but that's just because it's again not really skin. It's like a ghostly effect. And then you have the normal, which gives everything the shapes. Okay, so now let's talk about, well, how do we edit files, to get them into place. So let's choose a game that's not like the others. Okay, I have Troy installed, so I'm going to use that as an example. Also, it is part of a mod I'm working on anyway, so we'll go ahead and talk about it. And I'll go more into depth on that mod eventually anyway. So first off, if we load all pack files from Troy, we can open up Troy characters, but because I'm in the game of Warhammer 3, it's not going to show correctly. And that should probably be the same for like if I did Warhammer 2. Anyway, so if we go to variant mesh, variant models, this one here, oddly enough, let's go to man. Let's talk about armor, just for the heck of it. Um, let's see. I'm just trying to think of a good one. Let's see. Hector maybe or something. Let's just pull up a Hector. Okay. So Guardians of whatever, Hector generic armor, whatever. So let's pull this up. Okay, so as you notice, it's like white here, but that's just because my settings are not in the right settings. So I'm going to change it over to Troy so it reads it correctly, and I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so here, if you notice, it looks like this is leather, so we're probably not going to have a specular, but you have like cloth, and then you have this, and notice the cloth color is all white because it's going to be defined by the mask. So here you have your red part and your blue, your green parts, defining the different parts of the thing. If we look at the diffuse, let's take a look at it. Okay, yeah, it is leather. This is a leather and not like a bronze because it's defined in diffuse, but notice his white cloth and then his leather here is all defined in diffuse. So the specular is probably like just gray or something. Yeah, it gives a slight sheen to parts. Ah, here we go. That's actually decent. There are metallic parts on that. These are metal. It's kind of hard to tell, but these are like a bronze decorative effect, and that's set by the specular. So the specular with the base color or with the diffuse together will help define that. So the specular is the main thing, but the diffuse doesn't have like zero color there. Well, it has black there, whatever. The black will usually help the metallics shine through better. Sometimes you might do white if you want them brighter, but they're usually like black or white in the diffuse. Anyway, but the normal is the same, the mask the same. Gloss. I should show you gloss. Doesn't have a gloss here. Interesting. It's missing. Whatever. The gloss is just reds or black, red being glossy or black being not glossy. All right, so anyway, let's talk about converting over a color now. So let's go to skin. Oh, we don't need Hector. All right, so if we go to man and we go to skin, I'm going to take a look at my Ethiopian here. I think that's Ethiopian, ETH. I don't know. I've actually never played Troy. I just have it. Anyway, so here we go. This is how skin is defined as a mostly nude body with the interesting bits taken off, right? Okay, so, and all of the skin can also be broken up into different parts depending, so that they can combine like armor with skin. All right, now here, if you notice with the specular, there's like no real specular. The specular here, it gives a little bit of sheen to the eyes so they're not so dull, but that's the eye portion of it. But if I were to so right here, the eye portion has a bit of sheen to it with a gray specular, but that's just how they did the sheen of eyes. To be honest, the eyes are pretty freaking dull in Troy models that I've noticed. And so I find it's better to just take eyes, like if I'm importing, say if I was importing this model into Warhammer 3, the eyes that I would deal with is I would just take these eyes out and put eyes from a character in the game into the spot instead because they look better. Anyway, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull the diffuse, the normal, and the specular, and we don't need the mask. So we're just going to pull the diffuse, normal, and specular of this model. And we're going to edit it so that we can bring it into Warhammer 3. And again, what I want to point out here is that in the settings, if I have it in Warhammer 3, and I open this, we won't see him because it's not registering the same things. So we'll just have a pure white model here. Okay, so we have to mess with this. We need to basically create some the correct base color and everything. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull these up. So first off, I'm going to do the same thing, add from pack file, but I'm going to actually find it in my Warhammer Troy, which for me is local disk, epic, total war, data, and this is actually just variants, oddly enough. They don't have separate variant things. So variant models, nope, this variant models, man, skin, here. So we have the texts. Okay, so this is generic body 1, 2, 3. So we have diffuse, normal, specular. Notice we don't actually have like the mask. The mask is set, I think, as like all overall, but it's not needed. So we're going to add these in. And what we're going to do is we're going to right click and I'm going to extract these. So for me, this is going to be in my desktop, skin. That's where I'm putting these. So I'm going to do that one. I'm going to extract the normal and I'm going to extract the specular. Now I am going to change the specular over and I'm going to change the diffuse over to the files that we use. So you can do this in GIMP and Paint.net. In fact, you're going to need Paint.net anyway to export the DDS files, so you can actually just do everything in Paint.net if you want. But most people are more familiar with GIMP, so they'll probably do it in GIMP and then go from there. So in my skin, I have my my diffuse, so we're going to go ahead and open that. So what we want to do first of all is we don't need to make any changes to it. So this is actually fine because we don't have like a specular metallic aspects to this. Since I'm just importing over skin, I could go ahead and say save as DDS. It saves it in DDS fine, like we don't have any issues. GIMP doesn't. It opens DDS just fine, but it can't save them. And you don't need any plugins for that on GIMP. All right, so here I'm going to go ahead and name it base color, spelled the British way, and hit save. Yes, I know I've already done it before. Anyway, so now what we're going to do is we're going to choose BC1 sRGB DX10 Plus. So this is what we're going to use for our models in Warhammer 3, and we're going to make sure we have, oh, I should point out, yes, I have generate MIP maps as well because we're going to generate the MIP maps. Okay, now that's good. It's now a base color. We're going to do the same thing for our specular. So if we pull up the specular here, notice the specular has a bit to it. I'm going to select it and delete that. Don't need any of it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in this thing. Let's choose the color. I don't use Paint.net, to be honest. Let's see, can I adjust it? Jeez. All right, well, let's do that on GIMP then. Fine, whatever. Okay, so open, desktop, skin, variant mesh, variant models. Like I said, I actually use Photoshop exclusively for my editing, but I still have to save. Okay, here's how I do it because I want to use Photoshop. But Photoshop has issues with transparencies for some reason. My plugins just don't work with transparencies. I don't know why. So what I have to do is I open the thing in GIMP. I save it as a PNG. I then open that PNG in Photoshop, make the edits I want, save it as a PNG, open it in Paint.net, save it as a DDS file. It is stupid that I have to use all of those when I have Photoshop, but whatever. It is what it is. Okay, so I'm going to open the specular right here because I at least kind of know how to use GIMP. Not amazingly well. I don't really know how to use any of these super well, I'll be honest with you. I'm pretty amateur with Photoshop. Okay, so we have that here. Now what we're going to do is we're going to create a color. It's entirely green. Green, as a reminder, is metallic, and it's skin, so it shouldn't be metallic. We're going to hit OK, and I'm going to paint fill there. It's green. That's good enough. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to just overwrite this DDS. Now here's the weird thing, is it actually overwrites DDS files just fine, but it doesn't generate the MIP maps, which is not a problem in game that I've ever noticed, but it is an issue when you're opening it in Asset Editor. So I'll just go ahead and overwrite it, it's fine. And I'll go into paint.net, where like I said, have no idea how to even change the colors by whatever. And I'm going to open the file that I just had. So this is the specular here. Okay, so here, don't save this. Here's my specular map, and I'm going to just save as DDS. Yes. Oh, actually, rather than save it as a specular, I'm going to save it now as the material map. So material map. Okay. And now we have a material map. Same thing, BC1 is what we want to do for these as well. And generate a MIP map. And we are good. Now, I have these two things. So what I need now is, if I want my character to work correctly, I'm going to add from file, variant mesh, variant models, man, skin. I am going to pull this text. I'm going to pull in the base color, and I'm going to pull in the material map here. The normal is already in there, so I don't really have to worry about it. And now we have those in here. We can delete the diffuse, right click, delete. And the specular, don't need that, delete. So it is now defined by base color, material map, and normal. Okay, now let's go ahead and save this pack file as Andy, sure. Okay, so in this thing now, I don't need this, delete. Now I have those parts. Now, how do I get the rigid model to work in, say, Warhammer 3 with this? Well, we go to Asset Editor, and we're going to open my pack file I just created. So I'm going to open Andy pack, and I'm going to save this model in there. But what I'm going to do is, first I'm going to delete the parts I don't need. So delete this, delete mask, specular, gloss, and I'm going to change the normal. Where do we find that? So we're going to browse this in Andy, and we're going to do the skin here is normal. And I'm going to do the same thing with base color. So I'm going to browse to my base color in Andy. Variant models, man, base color here. Notice the base color is imported. And now I'm going to do the same for material map, browse, Andy, material map. Now, something to note, again, as a reminder, this guy here is being opened in Warhammer 3. So I now have this model here, and so I can, re-rig if I needed, but just so you know, he's a man. He uses the same animations from Warhammer 1, 2, and 3. So we're good there. And so essentially I could just auto-generate level of detail, and I can save this rigid model into my my mod here, and he's now in there, and I can now define his rigid model for the variant mesh definition and of some character, and he's in the game. So that is how we can convert over our models from Warhammer Troy into Warhammer 3. You shouldn't do that without permission. Like I said, I've gotten permission for one mod before, and nobody else I've heard of has gotten permission. So yeah, you need permission to do that. But at the very least, if you have a mod from Warhammer 2 that you want to update into Warhammer 3, hopefully that at least helps you do it. Even if it's not your mod, if you've gotten permission, this is kind of why I made this video, so that you have a better understanding of what you need to do. If it's your original mod, you probably have some clue of what to do. But if you're new and you're trying to update a mod that's been discontinued and you have permission from the mod owner, hopefully this helps. Anyway, thanks for watching.